Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this Higher Self Expo speaker interview with Tom Barnett. We welcome Tom here on the show. Of course, for those of you that are unfamiliar, the Higher Self Expo is going to be launched on the 17th and 18th of July. We have a 24-hour non-stop live broadcast from speakers from Australia, Europe, and the Americas, covering the topic of where science meets spirituality, a very juicy and relevant topic. My name is Nicholas Perrin, one of the co-hosts with Karen Swain for the Australian segment. I welcome you and I look forward to sharing with you some wonderful speakers and topics on this area. So welcome, Tom, to this interview, this very brief opportunity to share yourself. And for those of the audience out there that maybe have not met you, be wonderful for you just to share with them just a little bit about yourself and your journey and what brings you to the Higher Self Expo where science meets spirituality.
Sure. Thanks, Nicholas. So I'm Tom. I'm a holistic health practitioner. My journey began early on. I had a real fascination with the body and the mind, and I was quite academically minded. So I was very much into science. I studied science through school. I studied science in college as well, and worked in a bit of the field after college. What happened though is that through my interest and maybe being a bit out of balance with things, I became quite ill. And that's where science really had no offerings for me. Going back to everything that I'd learned and the professors that I looked up to, nobody could give me any assistance. And that's where science for me began to meet spirituality, because it was only through going beyond man's ideas through science that I began to get any traction as far as being able to get back on track myself and begin to heal. And so that's really where my journey began, and I became a holistic health practitioner since.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and sometimes the old paradigms or the conditioning that we've been brought up, takes us so far, and then we've got to crack through that ceiling to enter into new spaces. And obviously your illness was your golden ticket, even though at the time it probably would have felt like a nuisance or a distraction or something that was getting in the way for you. But looking back on it, based on your smile, I'm going to say that it was a blessing in disguise.
For you. It was. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the spirituality, is being able to recognize a gift where the ego, I guess, would determine it to be an inconvenience or pain or not fair or not right. And then when you go beyond that and you do find the blessing and the gift in it, that's where you can really, first of all, accept it. That's the way you can accept the gift in all things.
That's awesome. And what were some of because the spiritual insights that you received happened after your original science education. So what were some of the paradigm shifts that spirituality offered you that contradicted or was in opposition to the science paradigm that you had originally studied through?
Well, first of all, to go back a little, I honestly thought that I was always wired a little different, and that maybe I didn't believe everything that I was learning in science, because I think a lot of the reason I did well was the validation. So when I was growing up, I received validation and approval from my parents of being good academically. So once I started to wean off of that, as you get through your late teens into your early 20s, as you become a man and all that kind of jazz, I was already questioning, and I was actually getting, ticking off a lot of lecturers, because I just didn't accept what was told on face value. I'd always have to question and ask, and it would really annoy people. And I'd wonder why the act of asking questions was annoying them. Just stick to the class schedule. You're disrupting. Like, don't ask those sorts of questions. I'm thinking, but science is about asking questions. Why are we not asking? Why are we not questioning some of what just doesn't really add up here in class or in the textbook? So I think I always had it, to be honest. And then the fact that it had zero answers for me when I really needed it, that's when I just went, all right, that's done. So as far as what it was, there's a lot of elements. First of all, the way the body and mind work together, that didn't add up from the scientific perspective. The way the world is structured didn't add up through observations compared to what we're taught. And again, science being able to observe and then form hypothesis and then test and then get your findings. So being able to observe things that were very different from what was in the book, that was another element. And then, so I guess the main element though was the higher purpose. So science never really gave us an idea of a higher purpose. It was like a big bang, and then everything just happens by chance, and then chaos, and then entropy and all that. And I'm just kind of going, yeah, well, makes sense when you're a teenager or a kid, because that's exciting, and there's stars here and supernovas there, and then it's all chaos and a big bang, and how awesome is this? But then until you reach some depth in yourself, you realize that there's just got to be more to it. And I think it's when people have gone through a certain level of loss or trauma or pain or whatever it may be, that you start to realize that there is far more to it that science could never pinpoint or even allude to. So that's where it really hit home for me.
And look, and that's, really where science and spirituality meets. It is when there's the recognition of spirit or consciousness or some kind of invisible intelligence that's orchestrating something that is beyond our mental capacities and comprehension. And then from that, when that element is at least recognized, then the art of observing reality neutrally or to the best of our ability can actually unfold. But otherwise, science in the traditional sense is almost like a religion. Not really that much as a different paradigm and a different way of choosing to engage with reality and believe what is true or not. So sort of segueing from that, what is it that you will be sharing with the audience on the 18th of July within the theme of where science and spirituality meet?
I'll be sharing more of my journey of how that's unfolded for me. The religious side is so important. Like you said, I grew up in an atheist family, and they were so anti-religion, but at the same time, so religious about science and medicine. And then that was confusing for me as a kid as well. They're trying to tell me this, and I'm thinking, but you're doing the exact same thing. What's the story? It took me a while to figure it out. But yeah, elements of, I guess, my own personal journey that has led me to be able to kind of bridge the two, because I still do like science. It's not like I'm against it, because I'm very curious by nature. I love asking questions. I love figuring things out, and that's what science is. But there's a difference between science, the propaganda, and science, the actual art of questioning. So that's what I still have a love for. However, it only goes so far. And so that's the element, I guess, we're all talking about, is how far does science go? And then where does that meet spirituality, which then takes over the grander scheme of things, which really comes back on itself as well. It becomes a full cycle.
Yeah, beautiful. And it really is, like, through the art of asking questions, it's being willing to allow old paradigms or old ways of thinking to crumble, which can be challenging because, some scientists, for example, that have spent 20 or 30 years to create a whole series of theories and doctrines, to then 30 years later go, oh, maybe this is all incorrect. Like, that would be a very big egoic death, right? And the question of, have I just wasted all this time in my life? So I can also understand why some people, they don't want to question the fundamental paradigms through which they live because of that very possibility. But I think a true scientist, and it's basically what you've been sharing about the willingness to question everything and not being attached to what I have believed and what I have perceived reality to be, and be okay for it to all crumble down and die for something new to emerge.
Yeah, and even the words you're using are very, very poignant, because you mentioned crumbling and needing to die off. So what happens when we form these strong beliefs is we form a rigid structure of reality. And when it comes time for that to see the light of the day and it doesn't stand up, because it's been so rigid, it's like a rigid structure and it has to crumble. And that crumbling can feel like a death, but that's part of the journey. So we can have that become a lot easier when we don't form such rigid structures and therefore a rigid version of reality. And but likewise, if we have formed these throughout our life, then it will feel like a crumbling. And sometimes it'll feel good, other times it'll feel like a death. But either way, it's an indication that you're moving beyond where you were and into a higher place.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Tom, for those that would like to connect with you moving forward, or to get a little bit more of an insight into your work, what would be the best way for them to be able to contact you?
The website's the best way. Yeah, we set it up because I'm shadow banned on social media and since lost my YouTube account and various other avenues. So it's tombarnett.tv, and there's a mailing list option on there. So mailing lists are the last things that will go. All the platforms will go or be banned or whatever, all the social media platforms. So getting onto people's private sites, getting to the mail list, that means that you'll never be out of touch when you need it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you so much. Is there any final nuggets of gold you'd like to share before our beautiful expo on the 18th of July?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't really separate the two so much anymore, the science and the spirituality, because I think both are highly valuable. So I'm not anti one and more for the other. I really just feel that if we're in balance with all things, everything has its place. So I still have a great respect for science, and I still, obviously have great respect for the higher aspects of spirituality. And to me, I try not to pick and choose too much and segregate, because again, it's like that dividing. When we divide things, we're not whole. So I try not to personally divide science and spirituality into two completely separate camps. I like to combine where possible and live in both worlds.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Tom, for coming on to this brief broadcast to the audience of the Higher Self Expo. We're really excited to have you on that 24-hour broadcast, and looking forward to hearing your wisdom, your insights, your journey, and your experiences. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicholas.